The Turkish people, or the Turks, Turkish, Turkler, are a Turkic ethnic group primarily living in Turkey, and in the former lands of the Ottoman Empire where Turkish minorities have been established. The area now called Turkey has been inhabited since the Paleolithic, and housed various ancient Anatolian civilizations and peoples of Thrace during antiquity. Modern Turkish people largely descend from these ancient indigenous Anatolian groups, but their ancestry includes neighboring peoples, for example, Balkans and Caucasus, and Turkic peoples, albeit to a small degree. They speak a Turkic language, the Turkish language, which was adopted by the local populations who predominantly had spoken Indo-European languages prior to a cultural transformation that took place after the invasion of a Turkic-speaking minority from Central Asia. Turkic languages may date back to 600 BCE. And the first mention of the ethnonym Turk may date from Herodotus' reference to Tacitus or from classical Latin references to people in the forests north of the Sea of Azov. Chinese sources in the 6th century also used Uju to refer to the Gökturks. However, the arrival of Seljuk Turks also brought the Turkish language and Islam into Anatolia in the 11th century, which started the Turkification of various peoples in the region. The Ottoman Beylik united Anatolia, which had been previously divided among dozens of small Anatolian beyliks, starting from the late 13th century, and created the Ottoman Empire. Turkish identity strengthened with the rise of nationalism under the Ottoman Empire, and the migration of some 7 to 9 million Turkish Muslim refugees from the lost territories of the Caucasus, Crimea, Balkans, and the Mediterranean islands into Anatolia and eastern Thrace during the dissolution of the Ottoman Empire. Turkish nationalism consolidated with the Turkish War of Independence and the subsequent proclamation of the Republic of Turkey. Turkey has a very diverse culture that is a blend of various elements of the Oghuz Turkic, indigenous Anatolian, Greek, Islamic, Ottoman, and Western cultures. Due to the Ottoman past, the Turkish minorities are the second largest ethnic groups in Bulgaria and Cyprus. In addition, as a result of modern migration, a Turkish diaspora has been established, particularly in Western Europe, where large communities have been formed in Austria, Belgium, France, Germany, Switzerland, the Netherlands and the United Kingdom. There are also significant Turkish communities living in Australia, the former Soviet Union and North America. The ethnonym Turk may be first mentioned in Herodotus, c. 484 to 425 BCE, work Tacitus. Furthermore, during the 1st centuries, Pomponius Mela refers to the Turkey in the forests north of the Sea of Azov, and Pliny the Elder lists the Tiki among the people of the same area. The first definite reference to the Turks come mainly from Chinese sources in the 6th century. In these sources, Turk appears as Tuju, Chinese, Wei Giles, Tuchu, which referred to the Gökturks. Although Turk refers to Turkish people, it may also sometimes refer to the wider language group of Turkic peoples. In the 19th century, the word Turk only referred to Anatolian villages. The Ottoman elite identified themselves as Ottomans, not usually as Turks. In the late 19th century, as the Ottoman elite adopted European ideas of nationalism, and as it became clear that the Turkish speakers of Anatolia were the most loyal supporters of Ottoman rule, the term Turk took on a much more positive connotation. In Ottoman times, the millet system defined communities on a religious basis, and a residue of this remains in that Turkish villagers commonly consider as Turks only those who profess the Sunni faith, and consider Turkish-speaking Jews, Christians, or even Alevis non-Turks. On the other hand, Kurdish-speaking or Arabic-speaking Sunnis of eastern Anatolia are sometimes considered Turks. The imprecision of the appellation Turk can also be seen with other ethnic names, such as Kurt, Kurd, which is often applied by Western Anatolians to anyone east of Adana, even those who speak only Turkish. In recent years, centrist Turkish politicians have attempted to redefine this category in a more multicultural way, emphasizing that a Turk is anyone who is a citizen of the Republic of Turkey. Currently, Article 66 of the Turkish Constitution defines a Turk as anyone who is bound to the Turkish state through the bond of citizenship. Currently, a new constitution is being written, which may address citizenship and ethnicity issues. Anatolia was first inhabited by hunter-gatherers during the Paleolithic era, and in antiquity was inhabited by various ancient Anatolian peoples. After Alexander the Great's conquest in 334 BC, the area was Hellenized, and by the 1st century BC it is generally thought that the native Anatolian languages had become extinct. In Central Asia, the earliest surviving Turkic language texts, the 8th century Orkhon inscriptions, were erected by the Gökturks in the 6th centuries, and include words not common to Turkic but found in unrelated Inner Asian languages. Although the ancient Turks were nomadic, they traded wool, leather, carpets, and horses for wood, silk, vegetables and grain, as well as having large ironworking stations in the south of the Altai Mountains. During the 600s most of the Turkish-speaking people were shamanists, sharing the cult of Tengrianism, although there were also adherents of Manichaeism, Nestorian Christianity, or, especially, Buddhism. However, during the Muslim conquests, the Turks entered the Muslim world proper as slaves. During the booty of Arab raids and conquests, the Turks began converting to Islam after Muslim conquest of Transoxiana through the efforts of missionaries, Sufis, and merchants. Although initiated by the Arabs, the conversion of the Turks to Islam was filtered through Persian and Central Asian culture. Under the Umayyads, most were domestic slaves, whilst under the Abbasids, increasing numbers were trained as soldiers. By the 9th century, Turkish commanders were leading the Caliph's Turkish troops into battle. As the Abbasid Caliphate declined, Turkish officers assumed more military and political power, taking over or establishing provincial dynasties with their own corps of Turkish troops. During the 11th century the Seljuk Turks grew in number and were able to occupy the eastern province of the Abbasid Empire. By 1055 the Seljuk Empire captured Baghdad and began to make their first incursions into the edges of Anatolia. The victory of the Turks at the Battle of Manzikert over the Byzantine Empire, in 1071, opened the gates of Anatolia to the Seljuk Turks. Although ethnically Turkish, the Seljuk Turks appreciated and became the purveyors of the Persian culture over the Turkish culture. Nonetheless, the Turkish language and Islam were introduced and gradually spread over the region, and the slow transition from a predominantly Christian and Greek-speaking Anatolia to a predominantly Muslim and Turkish-speaking one was underway. In dire straits, the Byzantine Empire turned to the west for help, setting in motion the pleas that led to the First Crusade. Once the Crusaders took Iznik, the Seljuk Turks established the Sultanate of Rum from their new capital, Konya, in 1097. By the 12th century the Europeans had begun to call the Anatolian region Turkey or Turkey, meaning the land of the Turks. The Turkish society of Anatolia was divided into urban, rural and nomadic populations. The other Turkoman tribes who had also swept into Anatolia at the same time as the Seljuk Turks were those who kept their nomadic ways. These tribes were more numerous than the Seljuk Turks, and rejecting the sedentary lifestyle, adhered to an impregnated Islam with animism and shamanism from their Central Asian steppeland origins, which then mixed with new Christian influences. From this popular and syncretist Islam, with its mystical and revolutionary aspects, sects such as the Alevis and Bektashi emerged. Furthermore, the intermarriage between the Turks and local inhabitants, as well as the conversion of many to Islam, also increased the Turkish-speaking Muslim population in Anatolia. By 1243, at the Battle of Kozdag, the Mongols defeated the Seljuk Turks and became the new rulers of Anatolia, and in 1256, the second Mongol invasion of Anatolia caused widespread destruction. Particularly after 1277, political stability within the Seljuk territories rapidly disintegrated, leading to the strengthening of Turkoman principalities in the western and southern parts of Anatolia called the Beyliks. Once the Seljuk Turks were defeated by the Mongols' conquest of Anatolia, the Turks became the vassal of the Ilkhans, who established their own empire in the vast area stretching from present-day Afghanistan to Turkey. As the Mongols occupied more lands in Asia Minor, the Turks moved further to western Anatolia and settled in the Seljuk Byzantine frontier. By the last decades of the 13th century, the Ilkhans and their Seljuk vassals lost control over much of Anatolia to these Turkoman peoples. A number of Turkish lords managed to establish themselves as rulers of various principalities, known as beyliks or emirates. Amongst these beyliks, along the Aegean coast, from north to south, stretched the beyliks of Karasi, Saruhan, Aydin, Menteş and Teak. Inland from Teak was Hamid, and east of Karasi was the beylik of Jermiyan. To the northwest of Anatolia, around Sogat, was the Small, at this stage, insignificant, Ottoman beylik. It was hemmed into the east by other more substantial powers like Karaman on Iconium, which ruled from the Black Sea to the Mediterranean. Although the Ottomans were only a small principality among the numerous Turkish beyliks, and thus posed the smallest threat to the Byzantine authority, their location in northwestern Anatolia, in the former Byzantine province of Bithynia, became a fortunate position for their future conquests. The Latins, who had conquered the city of Constantinople in 1204 during the Fourth Crusade, established the Latin Empire, 1204–61, divided the former Byzantine territories in the Balkans and the Aegean among themselves, and forced the Byzantine emperors into exile at Nicaea, present-day Iznik. From 1261 onwards, the Byzantines were largely preoccupied with regaining their control in the Balkans. Toward the end of the 13th century, as Mongol power began to decline, the Turkoman chiefs assumed greater independence. Under its founder, Osman I, the Ottoman beylik expanded along the Sakarya River and westward towards the Sea of Marmara. Thus, the population of Western Asia Minor had largely become Turkish-speaking and Muslim in religion. It was under his son, Orhan I, who had attacked and conquered the important urban center of Bursa in 1326, proclaiming it as the Ottoman capital, that the Ottoman Empire developed considerably. In 1354, the Ottomans crossed into Europe and established a foothold on the Gallipoli Peninsula, while at the same time pushing east and taking Ankara. Many Turks from Anatolia began to settle in the region abandoned by the inhabitants who had fled Thrace before the Ottoman invasion. However, the Byzantines were not the only ones to suffer from the Ottoman advancement, for, in the mid-1330s, Orhan annexed the Turkish beylik of Karasi. This advancement was maintained by Murad I, who more than tripled the territories under his direct rule, reaching some 100,000 square miles, evenly distributed in Europe and Asia Minor. Gains in Anatolia were matched by those in Europe. Once the Ottoman forces took Edirne, Adrianople, which became the capital of the Ottoman Empire in 1365, they opened their way into Bulgaria and Macedonia. In 1371, at the Battle of Maritsa, with the conquests of Thrace, Macedonia, and Bulgaria, significant numbers of Turkish emigrants settled in these regions. This form of Ottoman Turkish colonization became a very effective method to consolidate their position and power in the Balkans. The settlers consisted of soldiers, nomads, farmers, artisans and merchants, dervishes, preachers and other religious functionaries, and administrative personnel. In 1453, Ottoman armies, under Sultan Mehmed II, conquered Constantinople. Mehmed reconstructed and repopulated the city, and made it the new Ottoman capital. After the fall of Constantinople, the Ottoman Empire entered a long period of conquest and expansion, with its borders eventually going deep into Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa. Selim I dramatically expanded the empire's eastern and southern frontiers in the Battle of Childiran and gained recognition as the guardian of the holy cities of Mecca and Medina. His successor, Suleiman the Magnificent, further expanded the conquests after capturing Belgrade in 1521 and using its territorial base to conquer Hungary, and other Central European territories, after his victory in the Battle of Mohacs, as well as also pushing the frontiers of the empire to the east. Following Suleiman's death, Ottoman victories continued, albeit less frequently than before. The island of Cyprus was conquered, in 1571, bolstering Ottoman dominance over the sea routes of the eastern Mediterranean. However, after its defeat at the Battle of Vienna, in 1683, the Ottoman army was met by ambushes and further defeats. The 1699 Treaty of Karlowitz, which granted Austria the provinces of Hungary and Transylvania, marked the first time in history that the Ottoman Empire actually relinquished territory. By the 19th century, the empire began to decline when ethno-nationalist uprisings occurred across the empire. Thus, the last quarter of the 19th and the early part of the 20th century saw some 7 to 9 million Turkish Muslim refugees from the lost territories of the Caucasus, Crimea, Balkans, and the Mediterranean islands migrate to Anatolia and eastern Thrace. By 1913, the government of the Committee of Union and Progress started a program of forcible Turkification of non-Turkish minorities. By 1914, the World War I broke out, and the Turks scored some success in Gallipoli during the Battle of the Dardanelles in 1915. During World War I, the government of the Committee of Union and Progress continued with its Turkification policies, which affected non-Turkish minorities, such as the Armenians during the Armenian Genocide and the Greeks during various campaigns of ethnic cleansing and expulsion. When in 1918, however, the Turks, represented by the Committee of Union and Progress, agreed to an armistice with England and France. The Treaty of Sèvres, signed in 1920 by the government of Mehmet V, dismantled the Ottoman Empire. The Turks, under Mustafa Kemal, refused to accept the conditions of the treaty and fought the Turkish War of Independence, resulting in the abolition of the Sultanate. Thus, the 623-year-old Ottoman Empire ended. Once Mustafa Kemal Atatürk led the Turkish War of Independence against the Allied forces that occupied the former Ottoman Empire. He united the Turkish Muslim majority. He successfully led them from 1919 to 1922 in overthrowing the occupying forces out of what the Turkish national movement considered the Turkish homeland. The Turkish identity became the unifying force when, in 1923, the Treaty of Lausanne was signed and the newly founded Republic of Turkey was formally established. Atatürk's 15-year rule was marked by a series of radical political and social reforms that transformed Turkey into a secular, modern republic with civil and political equality for sectarian minorities and women. Throughout the 1920s and the 1930s, Turks, as well as other Muslims, from the Balkans, the Black Sea, the Aegean Islands, the island of Cyprus, the Sanjak of Alexandretta, Hatay, the Middle East, and the Soviet Union continued to arrive in Turkey, most of whom settled in urban northwestern Anatolia. The bulk of these immigrants, known as Mahusias, were the Balkan Turks who faced harassment and discrimination in their homelands. However, there were still remnants of a Turkish population in many of these countries because the Turkish government wanted to preserve these communities so that the Turkish character of these neighboring territories could be maintained. One of the last stages of ethnic Turks immigrating to Turkey was between 1940 and 1990 when about 700,000 Turks arrived from Bulgaria. Today, between a third and a quarter of Turkey's population are the descendants of these immigrants. During the late Roman period, prior to the Turkic conquest, the population of Anatolia had reached an estimated level of over 12 million people. Furthermore, during the time of Turkic migrations, Anatolia had the lowest migrant-resident ratio. The extent to which gene flow from Central Asia has contributed to the current gene pool of the Turkish people, and the role of the 11th century invasion by Turkic peoples, has been the subject of various studies. Several studies have concluded that the historical and indigenous Anatolian groups are the primary source of the present-day Turkish population. Another study found a Dagai population from Caucasus closest to the Turkish population among sampled European, Middle Eastern, and Central and South Asian populations. Furthermore, various studies suggested that, although the early Turkic invaders carried out an invasion with cultural significance, including the introduction of the Old Anatolian Turkish language, the predecessor to modern Turkish, and Islam, the genetic contribution from Central Asia may have been very small. Today's Turkish people are more closely related with the Balkan populations than to the Central Asian populations, and a study looking into allele frequencies suggested that there was a lack of genetic relationship between the Mongols and the Turks, despite the historical relationship of their languages. The Turks and Germans were equally distant to all three Mongolian populations. Multiple studies suggested an elite cultural dominance-driven linguistic replacement model to explain the adoption of Turkish language by Anatolian indigenous inhabitants. A study involving mitochondrial analysis of a Byzantine-era population, whose samples were gathered from excavations in the archaeological site of Sagalissos, found that the samples had close genetic affinity with modern Turkish and Balkan populations. During their research on leukemia, a group of Armenian scientists observed high genetic matching between Turks, Kurds, and Armenians. The Turkish Cypriots are the ethnic Turks whose Ottoman Turkish forebears colonized the island of Cyprus in 1571. About 30,000 Turkish soldiers were given land once they settled in Cyprus, which bequeathed a significant Turkish community. In 1960, a census by the new republic's government revealed that the Turkish Cypriots formed 18.2% of the island's population. However, once intercommunal fighting and ethnic tensions between 1963 and 1974 occurred between the Turkish and Greek Cypriots, known as the Cyprus conflict, the Greek Cypriot government conducted a census in 1973, albeit without the Turkish Cypriot populace. A year later, in 1974, the Cypriot government's Department of Statistics and Research estimated the Turkish Cypriot population was 118,000, or 18.4%. A coup d'état in Cyprus on 15 July 1974 by Greeks and Greek Cypriots favoring union with Greece, also known as enosis, was followed by military intervention by Turkey, whose troops established Turkish Cypriot control over the northern part of the island. Hence, censuses conducted by the Republic of Cyprus have excluded the Turkish Cypriot population that had settled in the unrecognized Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus. Between 1975 and 1981, Turkey encouraged its own citizens to settle in northern Cyprus. A 2010 report by the International Crisis Group suggests that out of the 300,000 residents living in northern Cyprus, perhaps half were either born in Turkey or are children of such settlers. The Meskhetian Turks are the ethnic Turks formerly inhabiting the Meskheti region of Georgia, along the border with Turkey. The Turkish presence in Meskheti began with the Ottoman invasion of 1578, although Turkic tribes had settled in the region as early as the 11th and 12th centuries. Today, the Meskhetian Turks are widely dispersed throughout the former Soviet Union, as well as in Turkey and the United States, due to forced deportations during World War II. At the time, the Soviet Union was preparing to launch a pressure campaign against Turkey, and Joseph Stalin wanted to clear the strategic Turkish population in Meskheti, who would likely be hostile to Soviet intentions. In 1944, the Meskhetian Turks were accused of smuggling, banditry and espionage in collaboration with their kin across the Turkish border. Nationalistic policies at the time encouraged the slogan, "Georgia for Georgians," and that the Meskhetian Turks should be sent to Turkey where they belong. Approximately 115,000 Meskhetian Turks were deported to Central Asia, and only a few hundred have been able to return to Georgia ever since. After World War II, West Germany began to experience its greatest economic boom, Wirtschaftswunder, and in 1961 invited the Turks as guest workers, Gastarbeiter, to make up for the shortage of workers. The concept of the Gastarbeiter continued with Turkey bearing agreements with Austria, Belgium, and the Netherlands in 1964, with France in 1965, and with Sweden in 1967. Current estimates suggests that there is approximately 9 million Turks living in Europe, excluding those who live in Turkey. Modern immigration of Turks to Western Europe began with Turkish Cypriots migrating to the United Kingdom in the early 1920s when the British Empire annexed Cyprus in 1914 and the residents of Cyprus became subjects of the Crown. However, Turkish Cypriot migration increased significantly in the 1940s and 1950s due to the Cyprus conflict. Conversely, in 1944, Turks who were forcefully deported from Meskheti in Georgia during the Second World War, known as the Meskhetian Turks, settled in Eastern Europe, especially in Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, Russia, and Ukraine. By the early 1960s, Migration to Western and Northern Europe increased significantly from Turkey when Turkish guest workers arrived under a labor export agreement with Germany in 1961, followed by a similar agreement with the Netherlands, Belgium and Austria in 1964, France in 1965, and Sweden in 1967. More recently, Bulgarian Turks, Romanian Turks, and Western Thrace Turks have also migrated to Western Europe. Compared to Turkish immigration to Europe, migration to North America has been relatively small. According to the 2000 United States Census and the 2006 Canadian Census, 117,575 Americans and 43,700 Canadians claim Turkish descent. However, the actual number of Turks in both countries is considerably larger, as a significant number of ethnic Turks have migrated to North America not just from Turkey but also from the Balkans, such as Bulgaria and Macedonia, Cyprus, and the former Soviet Union. Hence, the Turkish American community is currently estimated to number about 500,000 whilst the Turkish Canadian community is believed to number between 50,000 to 100,000. The largest concentration of Turkish Americans are in New York City, and Rochester, New York, Washington, D.C., and Detroit, Michigan. The majority of Turkish Canadians live in Ontario, mostly in Toronto, and there is also a sizable Turkish community in Montreal. With regards to the 2010 United States Census, the U.S. government was determined to get an accurate count of the American population by reaching segments, such as the Turkish community, that are considered hard to count, a good portion of which falls under the category of foreign-born immigrants. The Assembly of Turkish American Associations and the U.S. Census Bureau formed a partnership to spearhead a national campaign to count people of Turkish origin with an organization entitled Census 2010 Say Turk, which has a double meaning in Turkish. Say means to count and to respect, to identify the estimated 500,000 Turks now living in the United States. Oceania. A notable scale of Turkish migration to Australia began in the late 1940s when Turkish Cypriots began to leave the island of Cyprus for economic reasons, and then, during the Cyprus conflict, for political reasons, marking the beginning of a Turkish Cypriot immigration trend to Australia. The Turkish Cypriot community were the only Muslims acceptable under the White Australia policy. Many of these early immigrants found jobs working in factories, out in the fields, or building national infrastructure. In 1967, the governments of Australia and Turkey signed an agreement to allow Turkish citizens to immigrate to Australia. Prior to this recruitment agreement, there were less than 3,000 people of Turkish origin in Australia. According to the Australian Bureau of Statistics, nearly 19,000 Turkish immigrants arrived from 1968 to 1974. They came largely from rural areas of Turkey. Approximately 30% were skilled and 70% were unskilled workers. However, this changed in the 1980s when the number of skilled Turks applying to enter Australia had increased considerably. Over the next 35 years the Turkish population rose to almost 100,000. More than half of the Turkish community settled in Victoria, mostly in the northwestern suburbs of Melbourne. According to the 2006 Australian census, 59,402 people claim Turkish ancestry. However, this does not show a true reflection of the Turkish Australian community, as it is estimated that between 40,000 to 120,000 Turkish Cypriots and 150,000 to 200,000 mainland Turks live in Australia. Furthermore, there has also been ethnic Turks who have migrated to Australia from Bulgaria, Greece, Iraq, and the Republic of Macedonia. The Turkish people traditionally lived in the Meskhetiya region of Georgia. However, due to the ordered deportation of over 115,000 Meskhetian Turks from their homeland in 1944, during the Second World War, the majority settled in Central Asia. According to the 1989 Soviet census, which was the last Soviet census, 106,000 Meskhetian Turks lived in Uzbekistan, 50,000 in Kazakhstan, and 21,000 in Kyrgyzstan. However, in 1989, The Meskhetian Turks who had settled in Uzbekistan became the target of a pogrom in the Fergana Valley, which was the principal destination for Meskhetian Turkish deportees, after an uprising of nationalism by the Uzbeks. The riots had left hundreds of Turks dead or injured and nearly 1,000 properties were destroyed. Thus, thousands of Meskhetian Turks were forced into renewed exile. The majority of Meskhetian Turks, about 70,000, went to Azerbaijan, whilst the remainder went to various regions of Russia, especially Krasnodar Krai, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Ukraine. Soviet authorities recorded many Meskhetian Turks as belonging to other nationalities such as Azeri, Kazakh, Kyrgyz, and Uzbek. Hence, official censuses have not shown a true reflection of the Turkish population. For example, according to the 2009 Azerbaijani census, there were 38,000 Turks living in the country. Yet in 1999, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees stated that there were 100,000 Meskhetian Turks living in the country. Furthermore, in 2001, the Baku Institute of Peace and Democracy suggested that there was between 90,000 to 110,000 Meskhetian Turks living in Azerbaijan. Turkish architecture reached its peak during the Ottoman period. Ottoman architecture, influenced by Seljuk, Byzantine and Islamic architecture, came to develop a style all of its own. Overall, Ottoman architecture has been described as a synthesis of the architectural traditions of the Mediterranean and the Middle East. As Turkey successfully transformed from the religion-based former Ottoman Empire into a modern nation-state with a very strong separation of state and religion, an increase in the modes of artistic expression followed. During the first years of the Republic, the government invested a large amount of resources into fine arts, such as museums, theaters, opera houses and architecture. Diverse historical factors play important roles in defining the modern Turkish identity. Turkish culture is a product of efforts to be a modern Western state, while maintaining traditional religious and historical values. The mix of cultural influences is dramatized, for example, in the form of the new symbols of the clash and interlacing of cultures enacted in the works of Orhan Pamuk, recipient of the 2006 Nobel Prize in Literature. Traditional Turkish music include Arabesque, Turkish folk music, halk musiki, fasl, and Ottoman classical music, sanat music, that originates from the Ottoman court. Contemporary Turkish music include Turkish pop music, rock, and Turkish hip-hop genres. The Turkish language, which is a Southern Oghuz branch of the Turkic languages. It is natively spoken by the Turkish people in Turkey, Balkans, the island of Cyprus, Meskhetian, and other areas of traditional settlement that formerly, in whole or part, belonged to the Ottoman Empire. Turkish is the official language of Turkey. In the Balkans, Turkish is still spoken by Turkish minorities who still live there, especially in Bulgaria, Greece, mainly in Western Thrace, Kosovo, the Republic of Macedonia, and Romania. The Turkish language was introduced to Cyprus with the Ottoman conquest in 1571 and became the politically dominant, prestigious language of the administration. One important change to Turkish literature was enacted in 1928, when Mustafa Kemal initiated the creation and dissemination of a modified version of the Latin alphabet to replace the Arabic alphabet-based Ottoman script. Over time, this change, together with changes in Turkey's system of education, would lead to more widespread literacy in the country. Modern Standard Turkish is based on the dialect of Istanbul. Nonetheless, dialectal variation persists, in spite of the leveling influence of the standard used in mass media and the Turkish education system since the 1930s. The terms exhaustive often refer to the different types of Turkish dialects. There are three major Anatolian Turkish dialect groups spoken in Turkey: the West Anatolian dialect, roughly to the west of the Euphrates, the East Anatolian dialect, to the east of the Euphrates, and the Northeast Anatolian group, which comprises the dialects of the eastern Black Sea coast, such as Trabzon, Rize, and the littoral districts of Artvin. The Balkan Turkish dialects are considerably closer to Standard Turkish and do not differ significantly from it, despite some contact phenomena, especially in the lexicon. In the post-Ottoman period, Cypriot Turkish was relatively isolated from Standard Turkish and had strong influences by the Cypriot Greek dialect. The condition of coexistence with the Greek Cypriots led to a certain bilingualism whereby Turkish Cypriots' knowledge of Greek was important in areas where the two communities lived and worked together. The linguistic situation changed radically in 1974, when the island was divided into a Greek south and a Turkish north, northern Cyprus. Today, the Cypriot Turkish dialect is being exposed to increasing Standard Turkish through immigration from Turkey, new mass media, and new educational institutions. The Meskhetian Turks speak an Eastern Anatolian dialect of Turkish, which hails from the regions of Kars, Ardahan, and Artvin. The Meskhetian Turkish dialect has also borrowed from other languages, including Azerbaijani, Georgian, Kazakh, Kyrgyz, Russian, and Uzbek, which the Meskhetian Turks have been in contact with during the Russian and Soviet rule. According to CIA Factbook, 99.8% of the population in Turkey is Muslim, most of them being Sunni. The remaining 0.2% is mostly Christians and Jews. There are also some estimated 10 to 15 million Alevi Muslims in Turkey. Christians in Turkey include Assyrians, Syriacs, Armenians, and Greeks. Jewish people in Turkey include those that descend from Sephardic Jews who escaped Spain in 15th century and Greek-speaking Jews from Byzantine times. According to Cond research, only 9.7% of the population described themselves as fully devout, while 52.8% described themselves as religious. 69.4% of the respondents reported that they or their wives cover their heads. 1.3% reporting chador, although this rate decreases in several demographics, 53% in ages 18 to 28, 27.5% in university graduates, 16.1%. The Turkish people, or the Turks, Turkish, Turkler, are a Turkic ethnic group primarily living in Turkey, and in the former lands of the Ottoman Empire where Turkish minorities have been established. The area now called Turkey has been inhabited since the Paleolithic, and housed various ancient Anatolian civilizations and peoples of Thrace during antiquity. Modern Turkish people largely descend from these ancient indigenous Anatolian groups, but their ancestry includes neighboring peoples, for example, Balkans and Caucasus, and Turkic peoples, albeit to a small degree. They speak a Turkic language, the Turkish language, which was adopted by the local populations who predominantly had spoken Indo-European languages prior to a cultural transformation that took place after the invasion of a Turkic-speaking minority from Central Asia. Turkic languages may date back to 600 BCE. And the first mention of the ethnonym Turk may date from Herodotus' reference to Tacitus or from classical Latin references to people in the forest names, such as Kurt, Kurd, which is often applied by Western Anatolians to anyone east of Adana, even those who speak only Turkish. In recent years, centrist Turkish politicians have attempted to redefine this category in a more multicultural way, emphasizing that a Turk is anyone who is a citizen of the Republic of Turkey. Currently, Article 66 of the Turkish Constitution defines a Turk as anyone who is bound to the Turkish state through the bond of citizenship. Currently, a new constitution is being written, which may address citizenship and ethnicity issues. Anatolia was first inhabited by hunter-gatherers during the Paleolithic era, and in antiquity was inhabited by various ancient Anatolian peoples. After Alexander the Great's conquest in 334 BC, the area was Hellenized, and by the 1st century BC it is generally thought that the native Anatolian languages had become extinct. In Central Asia, the earliest surviving Turkic language texts, the 8th century Orkhan Islamic, Ottoman, and Western cultures. Due to the Ottoman past, the Turkish minorities are the second largest ethnic groups in Bulgaria and Cyprus. In addition, as a result of modern migration, a Turkish diaspora has been established, particularly in Western Europe, where large communities have been formed in Austria, Belgium, France, Germany, Switzerland, the Netherlands and the United Kingdom. There are also significant Turkish communities living in Australia, the former Soviet Union and North America. The ethnonym Turk may be first mentioned in Herodotus, c. 484 to 425 BCE, work Digitis. Furthermore, during the 1st centuries, Pomponius Mela refers to the Turkey in the forests north of the Sea of Azov, and Pliny the Elder lists the Tiki among the people of the same area. The first definite reference to the Turks come mainly from Chinese sources in the 6th century. In these sources, Turk appears as Tuju, Chinese, Wei Giles, Tuchu, which referred to the Gokturks. Although Turk refers to Turkish people, it may also sometimes refer to the wider language group of Turkic peoples. In the 19th century, the word Turk only referred to Anatolian villages. The Ottoman elite identified themselves as Ottomans, not usually as Turks. In the late 19th century, as the Ottoman elite adopted European ideas of nationalism, and as it became clear that the Turkish speakers of Anatolia were the most loyal supporters of Ottoman rule, the term Turk took on a much more positive connotation. In Ottoman times, the millet system defined communities on a religious basis, and a residue of this remains in that Turkish villagers commonly consider as Turks only those who profess the Sunni faith, and consider Turkish-speaking Jews, Christians, or even Alevis non-Turks. On the other hand, Kurdish-speaking or Arabic-speaking Sunnis of eastern Anatolia are sometimes considered Turks. The imprecision of the appellation Turk can also be seen with other ethnic groups north of the Sea of Azov. Chinese sources in the 6th century also used Tuju to refer to the Gokturks. However, the arrival of Seljuk Turks also brought the Turkish language and Islam into Anatolia in the 11th century, which started the Turkification of various peoples in the region. The Ottoman Beylik united Anatolia, which had been previously divided among dozens of small Anatolian beyliks, starting from the late 13th century, and created the Ottoman Empire. Turkish identity strengthened with the rise of nationalism under the Ottoman Empire, and the migration of some 7 to 9 million Turkish Muslim refugees from the lost territories of the Caucasus, Crimea, Balkans, and the Mediterranean islands into Anatolia and eastern Thrace during the dissolution of the Ottoman Empire. Turkish nationalism consolidated with the Turkish War of Independence and the subsequent proclamation of the Republic of Turkey. Turkey has a very diverse culture that is a blend of various elements of the Oghuz Turkic, indigenous Anatolian, Greek, Islamic,